Welcome to another episode of Speaking of Speaking, where you cash flow what you know. So, speaking of speaking, nobody cares about your story. Yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Nobody cares about your story. Now, I know a lot of you have been running around here talking about, I got a story to tell, I have a testimony, all the things. And I know that there are people who teach you that all you got to do is think about what your story is, and you're going to break up your talk into a couple, the beginning, the middle, the end, and you'll put part of your story at the beginning and then part of your story in the middle and part of your story at the end. And what I'm here to tell you is that that is wrong. It's wrong. And I'm going to tell you why it's wrong. Here's a reason why it's wrong. Nobody cares about your story in the way that you would tell your story to a friend, to a family member, just somebody that you were just chit-chatting, shooting the breeze with, right? Nobody cares about that story. The other thing is that that particular story that you're telling, when they say tell your story, that means there's one story. And one story, just like one size, does not fit all, right? So we have to think about what are the stories that matter. So whenever you're thinking about how you develop a talk, how you develop a message, when I say nobody cares about your story, what I'm saying to you is that nobody cares about your story in the way that you usually tell it, unless you have figured out how to mesh that story, weave that story into the message, the larger message that they care about. Right? Because as speakers, our responsibility is to get on stage and to shift the people in the room. We're there to transform the people in the room. We're there to intrigue the people in the room. We're not there to just tell our story. We're not the big names where they put them on stage for that purpose, right? To motivate and inspire. Most of you who I'm speaking to and who, follow me and who are watching this podcast, you're like me. You are a thought leader. You are somebody who has a deep level of expertise, and your goal is to, shift women. It's to shift leaders. It's to shift teams. Whatever it is to create an impact in the world using your voice and your experience. Generally, our story, as we call it, is not that thing. But there are many pieces of our story along the way that are that thing. So when I'm working with clients and we are putting together their signature talk, I talk to them about what I call my 3 R's when we're thinking about stories. So the 3 R's are that the story or the stories that you want to tell or use in your message must be relevant, they must be riveting, and they must be relatable. So let's talk about those. They must be relevant. It must be relevant to your audience, right? Not relevant to you, not relevant to how you feel that, you're going to come off today, relevant to the audience. Let me give you an example. When I used to train on unconscious bias, one of the things, I would train leaders in I'll call it general population, right? So you're talking about HR leaders, just in any type of industry. But I also would do training in the legal industry. Well, the stories that I would tell in to general HR people and the stories that I would tell to lawyers, completely different. Why? Because the idea of a story is so that you are creating connection. And if the story isn't relevant, it doesn't create connection. I'm sure you all have sat in some, listening to somebody speak and they're telling a story and you're like, why are you telling me this? I don't know anything about this. That doesn't make any difference to me, right? I went to a training the other day and the guy who was doing the training, he's awesome. And he was giving his examples. And in that training, I said to him, listen, you're really good at that, but those things don't mean anything to me. I don't understand what that is. And so it's not making a connection. You don't want to drop people out of your presentation. And if you just tell them any old kind of story and it's not relevant to them, you're going to drop them out of your presentation and you're going to leave them behind. So it must be relevant. I would tell lawyer stories to lawyers, and I would tell HR stories from my background as an employment lawyer to HR people, right? So you understand that. So it must be relevant. Two, it must be riveting, meaning, meaning don't tell the whole thing. Y'all know we have a friend, a family member, somebody who, when they tell a story, oh, you're going to get every painstaking detail, right? And inside of the detail, you're going to get more detail. They don't need all that. They just need the parts that are going to excite them, the parts that really mean something and, get them to wake up. Because the idea of a story, again, is to create connection, is to give them an aha moment, is to really pull them in. So it needs to be riveting. It's not, every little thing. It's not, okay, well, I was standing in my kitchen and, on the kitchen, usually in our kitchen, we have we have our toaster over here and we don't care. No, we don't care. Like, what are the pieces of that story that are going to be so exciting, right? So when I lost my job as a lawyer in 2019, and if I'm telling that story, do I need to tell every single thing about, well, I came to work that day, and when I came to work, I went into my office and then I sat down, and then I was doing some work, and then no, I don't need to do all that. I just need to talk about the pieces. Like, I was at my computer and I heard a voice, and the voice said, turn around. If I start the story that way, people are like, oh, instead of me saying, yeah, I came to work that day and I walked in and I put everything down in my office and I talked to everybody. And then, I was sitting there for like an hour, and then, like 2 hours later, then something happened. Oh, right? You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're giving them the riveting pieces. And then they're relatable. I can relate. So it can be relevant, right? But it doesn't that doesn't mean that it's relatable. So I could be telling a story. So let's talk about lawyers. I could be telling a story about the legal profession. It's relevant. However, if I'm talking to transactional lawyers who just deal with paper, right? They don't go to court, they don't argue motions, they don't try cases, and I start talking about how I tried cases and what I did with the jury and how I would do jury selection and all that stuff, it's not relatable because that's not what they do. Yes, they're lawyers, and so a legal story is relevant. And for some people, how you pick a jury might be riveting. However, if I'm a transactional lawyer or I don't go to court, then all your stories about, being in court and the excitement of that, they're just not relatable to me. So again, I'm going to drop people out. So you want to make sure that your stories fit within those 3 R's. Okay. And where do you get these stories from? We think, especially as high achieving women, right? We have so many stories. We have so many things that happen to us. We also think that all the stories have to be work related, especially if we are going to speak to corporate audiences. We feel that everything has to be so corporate. It does not. It just has to be relevant, riveting, and relatable to the people, and be able to be weaved into the message. So here's what I want you to do, so that you can think about what are some of the exciting stories, like what are some of the things that I could really like pull out of my hat and put into my message. I want you to sit down. I want you to get a piece of paper, and I want you to think about your life in chunks. So I want you to think about your childhood. So think about your time up until you're about 12, right? So let's talk about your preteen years. Think about the things that happened in your preteen years. So for example, for me, because you might think, well, I was a child, like what do childhood things have to do with anything? Well, when I was 9 years old, I moved from Jamaica to the United States. That was huge. So if you want to talk about like change, and one of the things that happened is, as a child in Jamaica, we used to have things where you come first in your class, second in your class, whatever. And I was a bright little girl, and I always came first in my class. And in 5th grade, my teacher, Mrs. Fiani, and in my class, so my classmate at the time was Ziggy Marley. We were really good friends. I came first in my class, and what we would do is they would move us, like, they would take us to your next class so you could meet your teacher or whatever. So that year they had that ceremony where we would go up, and they did not take me. I was like, what is going on? So they knew I was moving out of the country. I did not. So they didn't take me. And I was totally distraught about that. Right. And so, how could I use that story? I could use that story about being kept in the dark about something, right? Always expecting something or something that has been habit and routine. And then all of a sudden, there's a change. So, I could use that story in that way. There's another story about when I was a little girl and a parent at my school slapped me. Child, I don't know why this man slapped me, but anyway. And, we took him to court and all this kind of stuff. So there's those, right? So there are the preteen stories. Like, think about what happened and think about why. What is the connection that you can make with that story? Now go to your like 13 to about 19, 13, right before you start your 20s. What happened in the time between you were 13 and you were 19? So if I think about my life, lots of stuff happened, but one of the big things that happened is that I graduated at 16 years old to go off to college, right? So maybe there's something in that story about, going off into the world as a young person, a 16-year-old now with these 18-year-olds, and leaving my family and going to a totally different state, to Rhode Island, which I had never even thought about going to, right? So there's that story. And then you can go from like 20 to, like 30s, your mid 30s, or maybe even 20 to 40, right? What are the stories in there? I have lots of stories in there, right? 20 years old, I graduated from college with my bachelor's degree. Then I was supposed to be starting my master's degree. And in between that time, I found out I was pregnant. So I could talk about that. How did that work? How did I decide that even though I was pregnant and I was going to be a single mom, that I was going to still continue on and get my MBA and then go after that to go get my law degree. So there's all kinds of stories in there. And then, so wherever your age is, like I'm 55 now, so I would still have more stories, right, from 40 to 55. And I could talk about losing my job and, all the things. I want you to start thinking about what are all of the life experiences, personal experiences and professional experiences that have happened that you can now pull all of those stories and think about when this is how you customize your talks. You want to know how to customize your talks easily? It's not creating a new one. It's switching out stories. That's the cheat code. It is switching out the stories to make sure that you are speaking to the audience and that they can understand. Because again, your responsibility as a speaker is to your audience, and you're taking them on a journey. So you're taking them from their current state to their desired state. I call this my bridge framework. So taking them from their current state to their desired state. And you are the bridge. You are the solution. You are going to get them there. And part of the way that you get them there is to weave in the right stories, right? The stories that are relevant, the stories that are riveting, the stories that are relatable, not just any story. So there we go. It's easy peasy. Not every story. Nobody cares about every story. They care about the stories that help them connect to the message that takes them from their current state to their desired state. That's it. That's all I got for you today. Now, make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode. Go back and watch the other shows. Share this with somebody who needs to know. And until next time, take care.